Okay, so today I'm going to tell you a little bit about phylogenetic diversity that is preserved in something we call travertine that maybe not all of you have heard of, and why that is important. Okay, so Tessa already talked a whole lot about extremophiles, so I don't necessarily have to go through this. So we already know they are organisms that are capable of living in extreme environments, and this could be extremes of temperature, pH, salt, and other conditions. And the extreme environment that I'm interested in is the environments of hot environments, especially hot springs. And this picture we've seen that a number of times today. So obviously, once you think about hot springs or hot environments, naturally what comes to mind is the early Earth. And then you think about organisms that are able to live in this kind of hot springs are probably good candidates or really the best candidates for life on early Earth and probably other planets. So we still have these thermal environments on Earth currently, and you can think of hot springs, hydrothermal vents, or black smokers, and all those other hot environments. So the hot springs that I'm interested in, there are two of them, which are really pretty, and Nate just talked about Yellowstone, so I don't have to necessarily talk about those. So this is Mammoth Hot Springs. In hot spring, we have a lot of geysers, hot springs, and all sorts of things. And most of the hot springs actually precipitate calcite, silicates, but the Mammoth Hot Springs are the only springs that actually precipitate what we call calcium carbonate. So these terrestrial hot springs, they are like thermal environments. They have geothermal waters that erupt, and when they do, they cool, and during the process of cooling, they lose some carbon dioxide, and they are able to precipitate calcium carbonate. And microbes have also been implicated in the precipitation of this calcium carbonate through photosynthesis. So think about cyanobacteria as it photosynthesizes. It removes some of the carbon dioxide that is present in the water, and that can also lead to the precipitation of this calcium carbonates, and these we call travertine. And this is so rapid that you can actually stay there and watch them as they precipitate. So what we think is that as these are precipitating, and because it's really rapid, you can have them basically trapped and tell microbes as they do that. And the good thing about those hot springs are that through time, they actually are able to basically collect information at the time of their precipitation. So through time, you can be able to study this and think about the climate, the paleoclimate at the time of formation, the microbial life, and the hydrology at the time of precipitation as well. So my hot springs that I looked at are two of them, and these are the largest travertine precipitating hot springs in the world, from Turkey and also from Yellowstone. So a lot of work has already been done using travertine, but mainly people have looked at what is in the water. And also a lot of work has also been done on the rocks itself. But looking at the rocks itself, most people have only looked at physical biomarkers, basically looking at fossils and also like crystals that are preserved in these travertine samples. So these are all good. So I'll just show you a few examples of what have been done. So this work was done by Allen in 2000, where they were trying to look at depositions that they can study on Earth for astrobiology, like when they go out there, what they can actually look out for. So these are filaments that you can see extending from pits of weathered calcite crystals. And these are chains of microbes that have been replaced by silica spheres. And these are also microbial forms that you can see on calcite. So this is all great. You can see fossils in all these crystals when you look into the deposit, the records. But the problem then is it's not always that you can be sure that these are actually from microbial origins. And the first thing that comes in mind, if you all have heard of this meteorite, ALH 84001, where there was all that great controversy about whether it was actually from a biological source or not. So then it's not good that we can use the fossils, but can we really be sure that these actually are from biological sources? Not really. So the goal then of my study was to be able to go in and try to think of other sorts of biomarkers that we can use instead of physical biomarkers to see if we can actually be able to track these deposits back in time and look at what was preserved in them. So the two basic biomarkers that we thought of first was DNA, which is not long-lived, so obviously we can't go back into the billions of years. So we try to go back to at least 1 million-year-old deposit and see how far we can go in time. And then also another option would be to look at lipids. So this work is going to just look at what I did looking at DNA biomarkers. So basically, we hypothesized that microbial DNA can be stored or preserved in those deposits, and through time, we can be able to use them to reconstruct the phylogenetic and metabolic activities that were at the time of the formation of those deposits. So basically, the two basic questions are what can we find in there, and how do they change over geological time? And then also, what are the metabolic potentials that are preserved or they had at the time of precipitation? So to do this, one of the most important work that comes to mind or that helps me is this concept of travertine depositional fascias that was established by my advisor in 2000. He basically looked at the flow path of those travertine deposits, and he was able to establish that there's actually come in 5 depositional fascias from the vent fascias all the way to the proximal slope. And basically, moving from one fascias to the other, you have different geochemistry, different fabrics, and different microbial communities that are preserved. And why is this important? So, because basically, going back in time, you can be able to track those fabrics and what they look like. So then if you have a modern travertine sample that is like a 10-year-old travertine, you can track it all the way back to like a 1 million travertine sample and be sure that they are from the same fascias. And once you have the modern sample, you know what you can find in the modern sample, you should be able to basically see the same thing because it's the same conditions under which they were formed. So then that gives you like a starting point for you to be able to move on. Okay. So I worked looking at 5 samples. One was an active sample that with water in a little bit of travertine itself, a 10-year-old sample, 4,000-year-old, 30,000-year-old, and a 1 million-year-old. So the 1 million-year-old one is from Chakmak, and the rest are all from Yellowstone. Okay. So basically the problem that comes when you have to work with ancient samples is a huge problem with contamination. So there's the first one that we have is the diagenetic alteration, which we basically can't do anything about. It's basically everything that happens to the rock after it's deposited. So there's water-rock interaction, there's water bringing in microbes from the environment, and you can really change that, okay? And then the ones that we can actually bring in are during field sampling. So you want to do all the sampling under sterile conditions, and also during your extraction, you have to do this in a clean room. So all of the work that I did was done in the clean room, and I have to wear a really fancy suit. And it's not fun when you are downstairs and you hear the fire alarm go off and you have to get out of this and try to get out of the building. Okay, so I did all of that. So most of my work currently was done under bulk rock. So basically, I take the rock and I crash it, and I try to get a DNA out of those. So what I got was basically a rapid decline in the amount or the concentration of DNA, which is not surprising because basically active tissues are able to repair efficiently their DNA, but if you are inactive, you basically build up a lot of damage. So over time, you lose a lot. And this was also done by Willis-Leaf, and they look at permafrost samples of different ages, and they got exactly the same thing. So I'll just show you basically what I'm trying to let you know. Showing here is that this is the active sample. This is the modern sample, and these are the ancient samples. And one thing you see is the difference in what is dominating. And quickly, I'll just point out that the modern sample was dominated mostly by proteobacteria and a little bit of cyanobacteria. And then the active spring, the modern travertine samples mostly by cyanobacteria, which is what you expect from a hot spring. But the interesting thing is, shifting to the ancient samples, it was all mainly firmicutes, which is also not too surprising because most of the works that have been done looking at microbial communities through time, you have a lot of firmicutes dominating with ancient samples, basically because these are really spore-forming microbes, and they're able to withstand all the harsh conditions that you find in the environment through time. So relatively, you're able to preserve those over time. So this is principal component analysis that shows basically that the main difference that we see in these communities is mainly due to the age of these samples and not because of where they are from. So basically, the geographical locations don't matter. It is the age of the samples that matter. So the quick sample is basically all that I have said about. So moving on, that's just the phylum level. That's like really, really huge. You don't really see much, or you can really pinpoint a lot of things. So what I did from there was look at family level diversity. So I went into all the samples and look at what the different families that I represented. And with that, I went into the literature to see what organisms are present in those families and what they are known to do. So then I came out with this thing we call physiotypes, basically trying to tell you what they are known to do. So these are like metabolic potentials. And because we didn't actually do metagenomics to look at the functional genes or anything, we can't specifically say this is what they do, but these are potentials of what they should be able to do. So basically, it shows just what we got from the phylum level diversity. Basically, the active sample is slightly different. Mainly, you have a lot of chemolithotrophic activity going on. The active spring, the modern spring, has a lot of oxygenic phototrophs and non-oxygenic phototrophs because of the cyanobacteria community that we have. And all the ancient sample, as we saw before, also mainly, they are all chemoorganotrophs, mostly dominating that. So basically, the good thing about this, I can 100% say that the communities that I have seen in these ancient samples are the ancient communities at the point of formation. But the good thing here is that they are subsets of the modern samples. Everything you see in the ancient samples are basically present in the modern samples. And since we go through back with the fishes model, we are kind of sure that this is what we would have seen. So moving forward, we're basically trying to do make the intersections and try to do what we call fluid inclusions, go into these fluid inclusions, and if they are primary fluid inclusions, we'll be able to tell that this was what was present at the time of formation, at the time of precipitation of these deposits. So yeah, this, of course, 1 million year old is nothing compared to 3.5 billion year old stromatolites, but moving forward, if we are able to go back in time, this is as much as I've gone for now. So thank you. And I'll take any questions.
All right, we have time for a few questions.
Do we find travertine anywhere in the solar system?
So there's, I think on Mars actually, there's like tufers and travertines that, because it's just basically carbonate deposits. So if you have carbonate deposits, so the difference, people think the difference between tufer and travertine is just the temperature difference. If it's formed at low temperatures, people think it's travertine. But I have seen one crystal geyser in Colorado or something, and it looks exactly like Yellowstone, even though it's even though it's a low temperature thing. Yeah. So.
Any other questions? Okay. Let's see here. I guess we can give Asangba, Abby another round of applause, and then